Hello everyone and welcome back to another edition of the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name as always is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in on this lovely Monday afternoon. We have a great show ahead, obviously, starting off by recapping the Super Bowl. A lot to talk about in that department. Then looking ahead to the 2025 NFL season by doing a way too early top 5 power rankings. Then we'll be talking a little bit belatedly about potential Myles Garrett landing spots. Obviously, he did mention that he wanted to go to a winner, so we'll be talking about the potential places where he could land. Then we'll be doing a way too early All-America offense. I know we're still talking about college football at this late date, but I still am excited about the upcoming season. And we conclude with a segment about European football, the winners and losers of the January transfer window, as we get a comment from someone who we haven't seen in quite some time. Andre, welcome back to the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. Actually, carry over from the Fantasy Sports Podcast when I was doing that. He's always welcome here, and that reminds me as well and perfectly segues into liking, following, and subscribing. As Andre says, it's going to get scary if he goes to Philly. I don't know who he's referring to, basically, but I think that anything's scary if Philly continues what they're going to do. We'll talk about that a lot more as the show goes on, but I do want to remind you guys, as always, to like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network if you haven't done so already and want to keep up to date with all the new content, not just my show, but other shows around the network. And always make yourselves available, as Andre has constantly done as one of my top supporters over the many months. Constantly make yourselves available to, as Myles Garrett is the man he mentions. That would be scary, but I might not necessarily suggest that he go there. There are going to be a lot of interesting places. But as always, Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features, as well as our website, gsmcspodcast.net, are always the greatest way to get your opinions out there. Feedback, input, what have you, even tips and donations are genuinely appreciated by all concerned. Just makes our shows that much better. But without further ado, let us talk about the Super Bowl. Even though it was a very painful game to watch, really, really unexpected, indescribable, in terms of how Philly really attacked this game and how lackluster this Chiefs squad looked. And whether it's, how bad it was compared to the halftime show, which unfortunately I can't talk too much about, even though it was the better part of this game, or the terrible score bug, or the very bizarre commercials, we still have a game to talk about. And even though it was not the best Super Bowl, even though it wasn't like 2 years ago where this was decided by a shootout, it was still a game in which I feel a lot of people expected more out of. And when the ball was snapped and this game got underway, even though Philly kind of stalled out a drive because of that questionable pass interference call, from the very first time I saw the Chiefs offense step onto the field, the first words that came to mind were slow and labored. Everyone knows that Philly has a dominant pass rush, a dominant defense collectively. But this Chiefs offense had no plan for it. They couldn't have won this game if they were told they had 7 years of good luck and they were told that they would become the next great dynasty. Nothing that they could have done to prepare for this game could have helped them beat that Philadelphia offense. Defense last night. And offense as well. Even though the offense didn't necessarily play too well. They just got good field position because of what their defense gave them and took advantage of it. They didn't really have to do too much offensively to truly blow this Chiefs team out. That was how bad this Chiefs team was. So let's talk about the Chiefs and how bad, statistically bad they were on the night. They let up 6 sacks, the second most in Super Bowl history. And then Patrick Mahomes, who is generally considered to be the greatest quarterback right now, had the worst QBR in a first half of his career. This is someone who we generally don't see this too often from. This is someone who consistently puts up solid performances no matter what. He had no answers. The most impressive thing was Vic Fangio did not blitz him once on 42 dropbacks. This was all the power of a four-man rush. And the surprising thing about this four-man rush was Jalen Carter, who everyone expected to be a catalyst in this game, had a big game, but he wasn't the most dominant player in that four-man rush. It was Milton Williams and Josh Sweat, who are going to be free agents, and we're going to have to see how their future holds up in the upcoming off season. But they were the ones who ultimately delivered. They had 2 and 2.5 sacks respectively. And because of that, Patrick Mahomes could do nothing. And we often talk about this Chiefs offensive line because that unit was going to come under a lot of scrutiny tonight if it didn't play well. And now more and more questions are going to be asked about how they handled this offensive line grouping. Because remember, early in the season, the question was at left tackle. They drafted Kingsley Suamataia, did not play well. They benched him for Wanya Morris, played even worse. They moved Joe Thuney. He played well enough in the playoffs. They signed DJ Humphries as a kind of backup option, but DJ Humphries got hurt as well. So then we went into it with Joe Thuney moved to the tackle position and Caliendo coming in to fill his place at guard. And they could not handle them at all, no matter where this rush was coming from, even though there were no blitzes. And then in the back end, this secondary did not allow any Chiefs receivers space in the middle of the field, which they love to do, even though Mahomes is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL against zone defense. There simply wasn't anything there. And it's not like, Mahomes didn't have chances to extend the play, make explosive plays. He had chances, but he was making rookie mistakes. As Andre said, Chris, in your opinion, what are some key positional needs for the Chiefs this offseason? I got to start with this offensive line. Even though they are constantly making moves for it, I think that they need to define who's going to be the left tackle to protect Mahomes, because if they're constantly moving people around, no one's going to get settled in, and this starting five up front isn't going to feel confident. And we already are seeing ineptitudes not just from the left tackle position, but from everyone concerned. So I really think that if you want to specifically target a key position, if you're Kansas City, it's the guards and the tackles up front. Those guys could not handle a four-man rush. But here's the thing about how these teams are built. Jalen Hurts was the Super Bowl MVP, but he played a very average game compared to what he played 2 years ago, in my opinion. He made the key plays right in terms of the passing game. And if you were to tell a Philly fan that Jalen Hurts is passing and his legs would have won you this game, they would have laughed in your face, because everyone thought that Saquon Barkley was going to go off in this game. But he didn't. Yes, he broke Terrell Davis's single-season rushing record in both the regular and postseason, but he didn't necessarily impact this game. It was Jalen Hurts. But here's the thing. The reason why this Eagles team, and we're going to talk about this in my way too early top 5 power rankings the next time. The reason why this Eagles team is built for success, no matter whether or not they lose a couple players, they are set up for success because there are so many different ways to win. And the players that they're bringing in really can rotate. As Andre said, I did not expect A.J. Brown to have a day like that, and McDuffie of all people. Me either. I think that receiving game as well was highly underrated as well in this matchup, because you would not expect, a guy like Trent McDuffie, one of the top lockdown corners in the league, to absolutely get shredded in coverage. But I want to go back to this point specifically, because the Eagles really have found a formula where anyone that they bring in can be dominant, right? And they do have a lot of questions, right? They need to re-sign a couple players up front, including the aforementioned Williams and Sweat, who, in my opinion, could have been viable options for the Super Bowl MVP themselves, and a guy like Zach Bond, who really transformed from a backup linebacker in New Orleans, kind of connection there. to now being a Defensive Player of the Year nominee, that's an incredible thing to behold. And that's what I like about this team. It was not just about, Saquon Barkley. It was not just about Jalen Hurts. It was about the unsung heroes in this one. And kudos to Nick Sirianni, to Vic Fangio, and especially to Howie Roseman, who a lot of Philly fans doubted in terms of his ability to build this team up to where they are right now. It's guys like Milton Williams and Josh Sweat, who may not even be back here next year, stepping up and accounting for 4.5 sacks on a night where this defense was the most dominant unit on the field. And Andre agrees with me that Zach Bond would be a huge loss. And let's talk about Zach Bond, because he was perhaps the most important, most valuable Eagle in that defense. And without him, the center point of this defense ceases to exist. And then guys in the back end, they drafted Quinyon Mitchell. Cooper DeJean trusted them. Cooper DeJean with his first career pick turning into a pick 6 in a big moment. Quinyon Mitchell, one of the speediest lockdown cover corners. And then the veterans that they have in the back end as well. Darius Slay, CJ GJ, who they brought in, a vocal leader and who they want to re-sign as well. So while there definitely are some rumblings about potential leavings, and Kellen Moore, they're losing him on the offensive side of the football as their coordinator to the Saints. I don't know why New Orleans is so big in his, but I do think that the continuity is what won this game for the Eagles. They built up to this point. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of people thought there was their newest addition in Saquon who was going to win this game. No. It was all the people who the Eagles trusted, the Eagles brought in, whether through the draft or free agency, that got the job done. And while Jalen Hurts is going to be holding the Super Bowl MVP trophy, he's the one going to Disney, this entire team could deserve to do that as well. Because this was not necessarily a complete quote-unquote Jalen Hurts day. It was everyone on the football field that the Philadelphia Eagles invested in that won them the game. And the Chiefs, lackluster as they were, they're going to be back. But it's going to be a very difficult one to swallow because of how the Philadelphia Eagles did it. But let me know what you think in the comments about this game continuously. Because coming up next, we'll be talking about the way too early top 5 power rankings for next season. Will the Chiefs and Eagles be atop them as well, or will some new blood be in this top 5? We'll be right back after this short break to talk about it.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. Before we get into our second segment of today's show, I do want to remind you, as always, that if you wish to contribute and interact with the show a little bit more directly, as Andre and a few others throughout the show have done already, the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features, as well as our website, gsmcspodcast.net, are the best ways to get your opinions out there. I love when you guys interact with the show. Other shows are in the network as well, genuinely appreciated. Tips and donations as well are genuinely appreciated by all concerned here at the network. Just makes our shows that much better when you, our faithful audience, are contributing to them. Without further ado, let's jump right into our second segment, looking way into the future, the 2025-6 NFL season, my way too early top 5 power rankings here. Now, this is my personal list, so people are going to have some qualms about it. There are some elite teams who I decided to leave out. and some fan bases may be a little bit unhappy with me. And ultimately, this is how I feel the top 5 will look like potentially once this offseason concludes. Because there could be a lot of moves made by all these top teams I've selected that either put them in a better spot and could see them potentially move up in my mind, or they're already heading into the season with an infrastructure that I feel is worthy of a top 5 spot. So without further ado, let's jump right into my top 5 power rankings for next year now that this year has concluded. Starting off my number 5 spot, this is where contention is most likely to happen with my power rankings, because there were a couple teams that could have been vying for this top 5 spot, but I ultimately landed on the Washington Commanders. And here's why. I'm going to be talking about this Commanders team all offseason. But here's why I really love the Commanders, even though you could say that right now they reside in perhaps the toughest division outside of, say, the NFC North in the entire NFL. Yes, the Cowboys, if they're healthy and Schottenheimer, can get them going, are going to have a shot in that division. The Eagles are coming off a Super Bowl victory, and as long as they maintain their core 4 offense and a couple of solid defensive pieces and can rebuild through the draft, they're going to be there as well. Maybe even running through the NFC, much like they did this year. But the Commanders are a team that, because of Jaden Daniels' success, because of the culture change, and most importantly because of the cap space they don't necessarily have to invest in with this rookie deal that Daniels is on, they can build even more. I'm going to talk about this in the next segment, but if I were them, I would be splashing the cash on a guy like Myles Garrett. And yes, they need a couple other pieces offensively, maybe a perimeter wide receiver who can win along with McLaurin. But looking at this defense, they need a pass rusher. And it's not just about building around Daniels on offense. It's about building on both sides of the football. And you might lose a couple of these veterans you sign on one-year deals, so why not try and rebuild through free agency as well? The draft is also a potential spot where the Commanders could be picking a defensive prospect as well. And most importantly, the reason why I picked them over teams, say, like the Lions, like the Rams potentially, like the Vikings, or the Packers even, is because of the way they can build, and most importantly, the fact that Jaden Daniels is still going to be on a rookie contract for the next 3 to 4 years. So that's why I feel like the Washington Commanders are a top 5 unit and can become a top 3 unit perhaps over the next coming months, depending on what they do this offseason. It's because of the promise that I put them here, not necessarily because I have any qualms or vendettas against any other team. So I'm sorry if I'm pissing off a couple of other fan bases, but they're my top 5 pick. Now, number 4, I have the Buffalo Bills. And this might be a little bit low for Buffalo, but this is another team that's highly depending on the offseason to build their roster. Obviously, we talk about their needs at the wide receiver position. The Amari Cooper midseason deal ultimately did not work out for them. But ultimately, I think they need to get a little bit bigger and more physical defensively as well. And also, looking at the secondary, a lot of people think it's one of the most underrated secondaries in the NFL, but they need a winner as well. And there were a lot of guys late in round 1 that I really like in the secondary, the potential the Bills can draft and bring in. But they also need to look at other possibilities in free agency if I'm them, because a lot of these guys are getting up there in age or are going to be impending free agents in the next couple of years. So if I'm the Bills, yes, one of my concerns is getting another receiver for Josh Allen so that the pressure can be taken off him in big moments. But I'm looking at this defense, because this defense to me right now, even though they can play solid football, they need a big physical presence. Maybe they can be in the Myles Garrett sweepstakes, but they need something to really give that defense a revamp and convince me that they can go into Kansas City or stay at home and beat Kansas City next year in the postseason. That's why I had them at number 4 behind a couple of other AFC teams. But that everything could change whether or not they add a receiver potentially in Cooper Kupp or T. Higgins, or through the draft try and get bigger and more physical on the defensive side of the football as well, because I can think of a few pieces they can add to really supplement that defensive roster as well. But for now, they sit at number 4. And at number 3, a team very similar to them, trying to get over the Kansas City hump as well. I just think they're a little bit further along. Maybe age is going to start to become a problem. Maybe free agents, especially along that offensive line, will start to become a problem. But ultimately, I just think they have a little bit better of a plan. And their defense, to me, is looking a little bit more stronger heading into the offseason than the Bills. That is the Baltimore Ravens. I think this Ravens team, the reason why I like it a little bit more than the Bills, they have a better chance next year of getting over Kansas City. I feel like they have their run game implemented. I think that Lamar paired up against Allen is slightly more advantageous in dual threat situations. And this defense, to me, is starting to round into form post Mike McDonald. They started to find their footing a little bit more toward the end of the season. Yes, the Bills got them at home, but I think that was the only major reason as to why they lost that divisional round game. If that were at M&T Bank Stadium, I think that the Ravens might have pulled that one out. And that's how close these two teams are in my mind. But going forward, I think that the Ravens have less questions than the Bills, in my opinion. They have more pressing questions to answer because of that offensive line situation. Ronnie Stanley being a pending free agent. I believe McCary as well. But I do think that they can address a lot more of their questions either through free agency or through the draft because they're not as many as the Bills have asked of themselves. So that's why for now I have Baltimore a little bit higher in my top 5 rankings than Buffalo just because of the infrastructure they already have. As long as you have the dominant run game combined with, Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman really improving in their second years in the league, and Isaiah Likely as well, I think that you have a better offensive game plan than Buffalo at this current juncture. And this is no indictment of Buffalo. That's just how I see it. That's just how I see their off seasons matched up as well. So this could be proven wrong in the coming months if the Bills decide to get more aggressive. But ultimately, I think the Ravens right now are heading into the offseason a little bit better. Then at number 2, and this could be another contentious one here, the Philadelphia Eagles. I feel that Philly, are not going to lose many people as people think and thus fall down the rankings as drastically as people might think. But I do feel that the worry is there, especially on the defensive side of the football, because a guy like Zach Bond is a pivotal part of how this defense revamped itself. And the guys up front like Sweat, like Williams, who prove that they can dominate in a big setting. And then the guys in the back end, Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, who are still going to be rookies. All of those guys you really want to have. But ultimately, I'm looking at the maintaining of the core 4 on offense, which is Hurts, Barkley, Brown, and Smith. As long as you maintain those guys, as long as those guys are willing to stay with you, commit to this team's championship window, then I think Philly should be just fine. They're never going to be called the sexiest offensive team, but they are going to be the most solid. And they have the foundation through the line, even though guys are aging out, to carry this over for a lot more years. But the only reason I'm keeping them from the number 1 spot is that they really haven't necessarily proven themselves in terms of longevity. Yes, they've won 2 Super Bowls now in the past, 6-7 years? But I want to see this Philly team really grab a firm hold of not just the NFC, but the entire NFL. They're starting to do that, and that's why I respect them a lot more than people who are saying that if they lose a lot of the players I just mentioned in free agency, they're going to falter a little bit. But I do think that they now have a formula that's going to be tough to beat if you're the rest of the NFL. So that's why I have them this high, but I can't necessarily put them as high as number 1. And number 1 is still, to me, the Kansas City Chiefs. And until, they continuously don't win big games, I feel like I can't move them down. Because, yes, they just got embarrassed in a Super Bowl in which a lot of people thought they were going to have the chance to three-peat. A lot of people thought this game would be at least close if they did come up short, but that was complete demolition. A lot of people are maybe asking me in the comments later why I have them this high. The reason I have them this high is because they're still continuing with this guy for the next decade, and Andy Reid's going to stay there, and this receiving core is just going to improve. And I look at this team and say, yes, there are a lot more deficiencies than people may think. That offensive line certainly has to improve. And you're going to have to find ways to slow down offenses where you stay on the field for longer than you would like. But I still think that this Chiefs team is more than the sum of their parts and more than what happened last night. It's not necessarily a team that you want to bet against consistently. And even though a lot of people might be predicting their downfall around this time, I still think that until they continuously develop this trend of losing in poor fashion over the next couple of years, then I can't move them from this spot. So let me know what you think about these rankings, because ultimately they were my personal ones and they could lead to contention. But coming up next, we move into a segment that could define this list in the offseason itself once this matter gets settled. The Myles Garrett landing spots that I think will be the most popular. We'll be right back to talk about them after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search.
Hello everyone, welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. And for our third segment of today's show, we'll be talking about a player who could definitely alter how the league looks over the next coming months, wherever he decides to end up, or if he doesn't end up anywhere at all and stays put in Cleveland. Let's talk about Myles Garrett here. The news coming out last week that he has requested a trade, wants to move to a winning team, a contending team at the very least. And I feel that even though he's in a situation where the Browns seemingly don't want to let him go, they're going to listen to a lot of packages, and they could get a lot of draft capital in return. And that could be potentially a nice springboard into the future post Deshaun Watson, even though his contract is seemingly immovable. In the next couple of years, it could alleviate some of the burden if you decide to build the draft, should you decide to trade Myles Garrett in this offseason. But in terms of the potential teams that could be in on him, there are a lot of intriguing ones. Maybe not necessarily the big contenders that Myles Garrett is thinking of, but teams that might be lurking that I really think could alter how this list that I just mentioned, my way too early top 5 power rankings, look in the next coming weeks if something concrete happens. But ultimately, all of these teams have the draft capital and the packages that I think Cleveland might be interested in, because it's going to be difficult to sway them. So if your team that wants to be in the Myles Garrett sweepstakes, you're going to have a lot of capital and a lot of assets that you're willing to give up for Garrett. So these are the 4 teams that I feel like are willing to go all in on a player like Garrett. So without further ado, let's jump right into it, starting off the team that missed my rankings but could definitely leapfrog into them in the coming weeks or months ahead, the Detroit Lions. And this is a no-brainer here. Once Aiden Hutchinson went down last year, they really did not generate that much pass rush. In fact, I think they were 31st in sacks last year. And now that you lost Aaron Glenn, you want to give new defensive coordinator, which one is it? John Morton, I think. No, John Morton's the new OC. Calvin Shepard's the new DC. You want to give him a franchise player, a generational talent to line up alongside another generational talent in Aiden Hutchinson once he comes back, because those two edge rushing coming off the edge could be very dominant in their own right, could really collapse a lot of pockets, and really could rival a lot of these defenses like the Eagles, say, potentially the Rams, if they get going, as one of the best defenses in the NFL. I don't know why I blinked out on a couple other elite defenses here, but if the Lions were to acquire him, were willing to give up a lot of assets to, I would immediately see them as such, even though we don't necessarily know how Calvin Shepard's philosophies will carry over now that he's their new DC. But ultimately, I think that it would be a move that really kind of springboards this new era where Dan Campbell has a lot more control than he had when Johnson and Glenn were there. And it would be proactive, because when I think of this Lions team now, I think of them as a team that now have a lot more questions about how their philosophies are going to look with new defensive coordinator and offensive coordinator positions. And with this potential signing, this potential trade going down, it kind of pushes those questions along. It kind of gets rid of any white noise surrounding these new guys coming in. So that's why I think they should be at the top of the list, potential Myles Garrett landing spots, and definitely a place that could contend for many years. But now let's talk about a choice that Andre suggested a couple of comments ago, where he could end up with the Philadelphia Eagles. And I don't necessarily want him to, because that would just be unfair if they do resign a lot of the players that they brought in. I do think that they are an aggressive team, and Howie Roseman has shown that in the offseason. And like I said, guys like Josh Sweat, guys like Milton Williams are free agents. And so if you want to bolster this pass rush, should a couple of these guys leave, why not go out for Myles Garrett? And I know that part of their defensive success in the past couple of years has stemmed from them being able to draft and develop a lot of talent. I do think that Howie Roseman has proven that he's not afraid to go out there. And even though his biggest defensive addition last year was probably the addition of a guy like Zach Bond, who was a backup linebacker, mind you, for New Orleans, this would prove that the Eagles are all in, and that they are going to be proactive in prolonging this championship window. So look for the Eagles to really kind of carry this debate over where Myles Garrett ends up, because they're playing with house money right now. Say they lose a couple of those pieces up front, and you're thinking, if you're a Philly fan, you could find another guy in the draft. Why pick and choose in the draft where you might have to wait for this guy to develop a little bit, then go out for the best defensive edge rusher of the past couple of years in Myles Garrett? So that's why I think that the Eagles are a weird one, because you kind of want to see how they handle the players they already have. But I still think that they will be in the running either way, just based off how aggressive they can be in the off season. Then let's go into a weird team here, because they're not necessarily a contender in my opinion. And this trade could be very unusual and very far-fetched if you really think about it. The Atlanta Falcons. And a lot of people, when they bring up the Falcons and Myles Garrett, will be saying that this could be a swap trade where Myles Garrett goes to Atlanta and Kirk Cousins comes in. And I feel like that could potentially appease both parties. But here's the thing. If Myles Garrett isn't necessarily sold on Atlanta, I feel like that's not necessarily the best, most proactive deal that the Falcons can do. But if Myles Garrett is sold, that Michael Penix is the guy for Atlanta, and in the NFC South, anything is possible, then I could see this trade going through. That's the only way where this trade could work for both parties. Because Kirk Cousins as well, let's not forget about that part of the deal. If Kirk Cousins was not feel comfortable in Cleveland, then he might want to apply his trade elsewhere. So if I'm thinking about this, and I'm both the Cleveland GM and the Atlanta GM, it's a deal I would want to see go through, but it doesn't necessarily fit the prototype of what both players might want. Because I truly feel that Kirk Cousins wants to remain a starting quarterback somewhere, and there are a couple spots that could want him, maybe even potentially like a Tennessee where he could be seen as a bridge option. But I don't necessarily think that in terms of contention, Myles Garrett would want to see this trade go through. Even though the Falcons were 31st in sacks, would really like to have a guy like him in their pass rush, in their front seven, dominating for the next 5 to 10 years. But ultimately, it's going to come down to what assets both teams are willing to give up. Because I truly don't necessarily think Myles Garrett would want to go to Atlanta if, he doesn't get sent with a package and the Atlanta Falcons can then build around him and really start to trust that Michael Penix is the guy on offense as well. So Atlanta is a really, really weird team in this sweepstakes just because I could see it happening, but it's going to take a lot to happen as well. And then the last team in the sweepstakes, probably the one that I want to see him go to the most, just because they can take full advantage of how they can build this team, not just around Jaden Daniels while he's under his rookie deal, but also defensively as well, the Washington Commanders. If I were the Washington Commanders, I'd be rolling out the red carpet for his services. Because, like I said, as long as Jaden Daniels is under the umbrella of his rookie deal, the Commanders have to strike while the iron is hot. And Myles Garrett is the hottest commodity on the market. So if I'm Washington, I'm pulling out all the stops, and I don't care what I have to give up in return to get Myles Garrett, but I'm giving up as many assets as I can while still keeping this team at the level of where they were this year, because Myles Garrett is that type of generational talent. And looking at all these other teams, right? The Lions, obviously, going to be one of the premier NFC teams in the next 5 years if, Shepard and Morton can implement their plans well enough. The Eagles, in your own division, for that matter, just fresh off a Super Bowl, can retain a lot of these players themselves, but they'll have questions about other players. If you're the Washington Commanders, and you're looking at the goings-on of other teams from the league, you're saying to yourself, hey, we don't necessarily have too much to worry about. Yes, we might lose a couple guys for our veteran one-year deals, but we have a lot of cap space. Jaden's going to be on this deal for another 3 to 4 years, so why not go out and make the aggressive moves? Be proactive. Challenge teams not just within your own division, but other teams around the NFL to keep up with you. Because, yes, there are going to be questions about Jaden Daniels as well next year. But Myles Garrett has to like what he sees out of Washington and view them as a top contender because of what they did this year. And it's a healthy culture that I think Myles Garrett will love compared to the chaos of Cleveland. So, if I'm Washington, I have to make a compelling argument that I had the best assets for potential Myles Garrett trade. And so, the reason why I think Washington should emerge as the number one candidate is because of all the reasons I listed. And because you don't necessarily have to sell your soul if you're Washington either. Because you can compensate for it with the free agency period, with the draft, and because of that, don't have to pay the price down the line as much as other teams might, trying to acquire Myles Garrett. So, that being said, I think these 4 teams are most likely to try and make it a good deal. We're going to have to see how Cleveland handles this situation. But let me know what you think, because this could truly alter my perception of the league in the coming months should he go somewhere else. But coming next, we do a way too early college football segment talking about the All-America team, specifically the offensive side of the football. Still want to linger in the world of college football a little bit longer. We'll be right back after this short break to talk about it.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere.
Hello everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. And for our fourth segment of today's show, we're going to be talking about another way too early analysis of something specific in the football world, specifically college football. I know a lot of you guys might be getting sick and tired of this college football talk at this late date, but I can't get over it. I still am not getting over this season. Let's talk about potential All-America candidates for the 2025-26 NCAA college football season, and it should be a good one. There's going to be a lot of questions about who the best players on the offensive side of football are, whether some of these younger underclassmen continue their ascension to the best of the positions. And then the QB position, that's what I feel like is going to be the most conversation, the most discussion concerning where this All-America list could pan out in the college football season, because there's a lot of returning talent, a lot of young talent haven't gotten their chance yet. Hint, hint, Arch Manning. But ultimately, I really like the tenor of this All-America offense that I have here to present to you guys. Without further ado, let's jump right into it, starting off at the QB position. Like I said, this is the position with the most conversation discussion surrounding it, because really anyone could arise and potentially be the QB for this All-America team next year. Whether it be, guys like Arch Manning, Julian Sayin, Devin Brown, Dante Moore, guys who are getting their first years of college experience under their belt, or guys like Carson Beck, Garrett Nussmeier returning. But the one guy who I really think a lot of people are underestimating, perhaps the most experienced college football quarterback right now, perhaps outside of, say, Drew Aller, is Cade Klubnik. This is the guy who a couple of years ago was replacing the chaos of DJ Uiagalelei and didn't necessarily live up to the hype, but the second year in this system really got to see him develop and mature. The second year under coordinator Garrett Riley, he had a total of 43 touchdowns, 36 passing, 7 rushing, and only one of 2 FBS QBs to throw for 3,600 yards and rush for 400 as well. And the beauty of a guy like Cade Klubnik, even though he plays for a school that's more old school than any team in college football, the Clemson Tigers, is that there's a lot of continuity. And I know a lot of people aren't necessarily investing that highly in this Clemson Tigers team, but Cade Klubnik, like I said, brings 3 years now starting experience. Bryant Westco and TJ Moore aren't going anywhere. Antonio Williams either. This might be his last year, but that's the core receiving group you had last year, now being taken into next year. This is now your 3rd year under coordinator Garrett Riley. And because of that continuity, you can't necessarily doubt that Cade Klubnik won't have another excellent year. So that's why I think a lot of people, even with all the hype around first-year guys coming in, other guys continuing their college careers, Cade Klubnik kind of fall to the wayside in your mind, but still is perhaps the best returning college football quarterback, and the reason why he's QB1 in this All-America offense. The second team guy, though, is Arch Manning, and we'll have to see what his offensive line looks like and how his mobility impacts that aspect of their game. But I do think that he could be a sneaky option, but it's Cade Klubnik right now who's the QB1. Let's go through the running back positions. Jeremiah Love, man. I really love this guy, no pun intended. He returns along with Darian Price in the backfield, and no matter who the new Notre Dame quarterback is, whether it be Steve Angeli, who has 4 years of backup experience, or freshman phenom CJ Carr, they're going to love having these two guys in the backfield, but specifically Love. Very tough, physical style of football, 19 total touchdowns last year, really huge in the postseason. Two of the most dominant rushing touchdowns, very different rushing touchdowns. The first touchdown of the 12-team college football playoff era, that 98-yard run against Indiana at Beaver Stadium, then that 2-yard touchdown filled with aggression, passion against Penn State, yes, because we're going to talk about the Penn State running back in a little bit, so I'm trying not to get too confused. But that 2-yard run showing the aggression, passion, and physicality necessary for this Notre Dame backfield to be what it was last year. And now that he's returning, he definitely has RB1 status in this All-America team written all over him. But now, let's talk about his RB2, the guy he played against in that semifinal, not directly, but the guy on the opposite sideline here, Nicholas Singleton. And I really love that both of these guys are returning to them. Because yes, you can say there were better backs. Ashton Jeanty, Cam Scatterbu, Dylan Sampson maybe, Jordan James, maybe CJ Baxter next year once he's fully healthy in this Texas offense. But these two guys, because of how their teams played, really were integral parts of their CFP runs and will be next year. And I like how they're now in different situations, right? Jeremiah Love is now in New Horizons. No Riley Leonard in the backfield to kind of counterbalance his own running abilities as well. Now trying to get integrated into a new style of offense with either Angeli or Carr. And then Singleton still has Allen with him in the backfield as well. So, really going to be intrigued to see how that plays out for both of them, because Penn State with this backfield is going to be dynamic as well. They could potentially be the last team standing in 2026 because of Nick Singleton. 1,099 yards last year, 6.4 yards per carry, 17 total touchdowns, 12 rushing, 5 receiving. Just a versatile back, and I really like how this backfield is setting up just because of their physical brand of play, but in the different situations that they find themselves in. I do feel that just because Jeremiah Love might have the tougher task, he will remain the RB1. But then a guy like Nicholas Singleton, who has always been important no matter what the tenor of the Penn State offense looks like, even though they want to develop Drew Aller into an NFL-ready quarterback, he still will remain an integral part of this Penn State offense, especially if the wide receiver help does not come. So that's why I really like this backfield. But then there are guys, like I mentioned, CJ Baxter is coming back to the Texas backfield. I still think Dylan Sampson's going to be an elite SEC running back. There are guys out there who you're going to be impressed by. Maybe even guys who you might not have ever heard of, because a couple of years ago no one had ever heard of a guy like Ollie Gordon. This year, Ashton Jeanty was expected to be a true talent for Boise State, and the reason why I made the CFP, but no one expected him to be that prolific. So you never know. But these two guys, Love and Singleton, are as best of a bet as any to be the All-America guys once the season ends next year. And now let's talk about my favorite position, because these two guys, for the next couple of years, no matter how long they stay in college football, will define the wide receiver position. It's Jeremiah Smith at wide receiver 1 and at wide receiver 2, a freshman that a lot of people kind of forgot about, but still has as much electrifying speed and agility and ability to win 50-50 balls as Smith himself, Ryan Williams. And I really love that it's two freshmen in this All-America team, because these two guys still have a lot of college football left in them, and I really am excited to see how their teams utilize them. Again, two guys in unknown horizons. Who knows who the quarterback of Alabama is going to be? Is it going to be Ty Simpson, who is going to bring potentially a very intriguing dual threat ability with him? And for Jeremiah Smith, is Julian Sayin really going to elevate your game as much as, hey, Will Howard did? How is that downfield passing game for Ohio State going to look like? And can he be the catalyst for it? Can he be the X factor? Because he averaged 17.3 yards per reception, 15 touchdowns this season. And for Williams, 10 touchdowns, 18 yards per catch, 5 receptions of 30 plus. I think that's the most by a freshman ever. Both of these guys now in unfamiliar territory. And so, as much as I love them, that's going to be a big question. How both of them get impacted in terms of who their quarterback is. I think that Sayin has a better profile than whoever Alabama puts out there on the field, but we can't be sure, and Sayin's going to get a big test at home when Texas rolls into town looking for revenge. So, if you don't immediately establish that pass game for both of these guys, chances are other receivers around the different conferences are going to step up and make themselves known. But these two guys, because of how young they are, because of how much more college football experience they have left in them, are still the best bets, in my opinion, for this All-America team until proven otherwise. Then the tight end position gets a little bit more complicated, and this guy, I really don't know how to feel about him because he's transferring to Ohio State from perhaps one of the worst college football teams of all time, last year's Purdue Boilermakers. But I do think that there really aren't that many high-profile tight ends to really depend upon in terms of predicting how they're going to perform over a season that's several months away. So Max Clare, for right now, because of the platform he enters, because of the team he enters, could be seen as the safest bet. He's still at 51 catches for 685 yards, 4 touchdowns at that piss-poor Purdue team. He had 33 catches, 4 first downs, so maybe because of how bad of a situation he was in last year moving to Ohio State, that production could be seen to go up, and especially if you know Julian Sayin wants more targets to rely upon outside of Smith and Tate perhaps, then Max Clare could be seen as a savvy option as well that really challenges opposing offenses. But right now, in my mind's eye, I can't necessarily say that anyone can challenge a guy like Max Clare just because of the landscape of tight ends in college football. We're losing a lot of talent once. Tyler Warren, the prime example. So I can't really say that this position will be as defined as it feels right now, but Max Clare, because of Ohio State's power and hold over the Big Ten and the college football world right now, I can't see a better option in sight. But overall, I'm really excited for the 2025-6 college football season, and I know that a lot of people don't want to talk about college football right now, but I just had to present this to you, get you guys thinking about some of the best players next year. But coming next, we transition across the pond, talking about the January transfer window, who won and who lost, and which clubs and players look better or worse off from it. And right back after this short break to talk about it. Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. And for our final segment of today's show, we go across the pond, talking all things January transfer window that just wrapped up a couple of weeks ago. And we have to talk about the big winners and losers of this window, because this was one of the best January transfer windows, in my opinion, in recent memory. A lot of movement, a lot of players finding themselves in new situations, a lot of positive to take away from it, but for some, a lot of negatives as well. Potentially not the worst negatives, say, for some of these teams that I'm going to mention, but ultimately, for where some of these teams are, they could have done a lot better or a lot worse, in the opinions of the winners. But also, several players in better situations now than in recent memory. Without further ado, let's talk about them all as well. Starting off with the first winner, a team that really did not necessarily need this guy, but because it's the price that we're able to get him at, that I'm really intrigued. Because now, this team potentially has the best crop of wingers in the entire UEFA setup, in terms of domestically, obviously, not internationally. And that is PSG, Paris Saint-Germain. And with the signing of Kvaratskhelia, I do think that this PSG team not only was able to cement their status as one of the best teams in terms of the winger position, but also their status as a team that can poach a couple players as well. Because this, remember, was a team willing to splash the cash on a lot of players. They brought in Neymar for a then record transfer fee of 222 million euros and all of that stuff that went on back then. But now they made a shrewd addition with the signing of Kvaratskhelia that really was able to transform the tenor of this team, but also at a cheap price. Because I look at all the wingers they have, and yes, it's a deep roster of wingers. Bradley Barcola, Lee Kang-in, guys of that magnitude, forgetting a big one. Ousmane Dembele is the big one I'm forgetting about. But by bringing in Kvaratskhelia and only about 40 million euros, that really is saying something about PSG. Because before, they would have probably met Napoli's valuation of Kvaratskhelia to buy him. And for the past couple of years, as Kvaratskhelia transfer rumors have been transpiring, the price was way higher, potentially as high as 120 million euros for several clubs. But I do feel like Kvaratskhelia is someone who, as a steal in this PSG team, really can add a lot of pace and creativity to an already crowded winger group. And then another big deal that went down for PSG is getting Xavi Simons to sign permanently on loan from... sending Xavi Simons away to RB Leipzig for a permanent fee of 40 million for that profit as well. And then as well as that, moving on Randall Cole Muani. So this is a bit of shrewd business for a club known to spend big money. By signing Kvaratskhelia and then moving on, getting good profit out of Simons and Kolo Muani, I feel like this PSG team really won the window in a way a lot of people might not have expected from them. So kudos to them for making shrewd deals, both in terms of incoming players and outgoing players, to really bolster their squad. But then a loser, potentially, in all of this is a team that really is in the doldrums right now and should have done a lot more business and should have been a lot more proactive to really bolster their semi-new manager Ruben Amorim, and that is Manchester United. I know that because of PSR rules, they can't necessarily splash the cash, especially in the winter window, but I feel like United need to be more proactive. Yes, they got a guy in Patrick Dorgu who essentially fills a very important position in Ruben Amorim's system, but he's only 20 years old, and there were other areas that I feel like this United team could have addressed as well. For example, you're not getting many goals on the other end either. You may want to shore up that back line, but if you don't have a prolific goal scorer up top, you're not going to score any goals to compensate for your lack of depth in your back line either. Dorgu's nice for the system, but a goal scorer is what you need if you're United. And so I feel like that inability to diagnose a player who you can bring in that can help you up top was an ultimate failure for me. And I know that it's early on in the Ruben Amorim tenure at United. And I know that this board is trying to figure things out. And I know that because it's the Premier League, profit and sustainability rules rule the roost. And you don't necessarily want to go over them or circumvent them. But if you're a team like Man United that wants to try to become again the cream of the crop in the Premier League and in Europe for that matter, you need to think like a big club. And sometimes you might need to spend like a big club. The fact that United were in on so many different guys, Gyökeres, Jimenez maybe, so many different strikers were rumored to want to go to Man United. Even a winger like Matthijs Tel, that whole deal falling through. You have to be disappointed if you're a United fan and how they handled the window. But ultimately, like I said, potentially the summer window will bear more fruit because you have more time. And, that's where a lot of these clubs do their biggest spending. So, if I'm Man United, I'm not necessarily completely panicked from this window because I did get a player in Dorgu who has a chance to truly improve because of his age. But not getting as goal scorer in a period where you're not scoring many goals or creating chances for that matter is really frustrating. So that's why they're a loser in my book for this January transfer window. Let's go to another winner. Speaking of Manchester United, speaking of a certain player from Manchester United, the first player to make my list here. How about Marcus Rashford? Because here's the thing. A lot of people in Man United will say Marcus Rashford didn't want to win. He didn't want to listen to all these managers tell him what to do. But I believe that Marcus Rashford wasn't invested in heavily by any of these managers. And yes, he had a couple of issues along the way, those parties that he went to allegedly. But ultimately, this is a player who, if you're Man United, you saw rise up through your ranks, have impressive seasons, have one of the most prolific goal-scoring seasons in a Man United shirt in the past couple of years, get cast to the wayside for guys in Højlund and Zirkzee who you splashed the cash on, not necessarily investing wisely on, now struggling to even score any goals. And now Marcus Rashford, even though this is a loan move, and I believe it's not necessarily one that will see him move to Villa permanently, got out of there. And yes, Villa is definitely a place where wingers are going to have a lot of competition for the way they're playing right now. But I do like that Marcus Rashford was able to get out of that situation, go somewhere where his career might get revitalized, go somewhere that actually wants him, rather than stagnate on the bench for Man United, for a team that obviously doesn't want to work him into their plans. And the funny thing is, he's better than a lot of the other options you have out there. I mean, yes, Garnacho and Ahmad are bright spots, but if you really want to create more chances, why not give Rashford a run at least in, say, cup competition? Because he can't just while away after, you've seen him come up through the ranks at Man United and you've invested time in him. And now both Ten Hag and Amorim don't want anything to do with him. So I feel that by moving on, whether or not it's permanent or not, was a good option for Marcus Rashford in the long term. Because it gives him a chance to find his footing again. And, if this loan is terminated, he goes back to United, it gives him a chance to get reincorporated into this team. So that's why I feel like this is a win-win proposition for Marcus Rashford. He gets a chance to rejuvenate his career, and he gets a chance to prove the Man United haters wrong. The last team that's going to be a loser for me on this list is a team that, yes, is still in a title race, but still not necessarily address enough to convince me that they will stay in the title race for long. It's Arsenal. And Arsenal is always going to be a team that a lot of people try and criticize as much as possible because of the fact that they don't have too much attacking depth, and they failed to sign a high-profile forward in this window specifically. But I am liking what I see out of Arteta's plan for this Arsenal team. Because it's a plan that I feel like the Arsenal players are beginning to invest in. And it's a plan that I feel incorporates the best of what you want to see out of a team like Arsenal. They're bringing in young talent now. Nwaneri, Miles Lewis-Skelly is coming into this team, and they're delivering solid performances for you. But at the end of the day, when you're a high-profile team looking to finally get over the hump and win a title, you can't necessarily ignore the noise around you, whether this is more of a media situation than an in-house situation, and ignore the fact that you do potentially need a high-profile forward to alleviate some of the pressure on, say, a guy like Kai Havertz or Gabriel Jesus, because of the fact that this is the title race. This is the real thing. And yes, this might have shocked a lot of people in the Arsenal organization because of the fact that this came sooner rather than later in the Mikel Arteta era, but this is now real. This is now a period where if you fail to win a Premier League title, it's not going to be looking pretty for you. So that's why I say Arsenal is a loser, even though I like what Arteta's doing in-house. Because potentially you're going to need someone out of house to come in and get the job done and score the goals for you to lift you to a Premier League title. So that's why I think they're a loser. But let me know what you think in the comments about the January transfer window in general, because that will just about do it for today's show. This has been the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I've been your host, Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back here tomorrow at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. As always, like, follow, subscribe. Make yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features, as well as our website, gsmcpodcast.net, to contribute and interact with our show a little bit more directly. Other than that, out for today. See y'all tomorrow.